Hello, my name is Wildstag, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant. Today I'm going to be discussing this book, Fate of the Fallen. I bought this book used despite the condition it's in. It is very, very well kept. I bought this book used at McKay Books in Manassas, Virginia. The listed price here is $19. I bought it for $8.99, which is a pretty good value. You know, most will do 50 to 60% off any used book. This book is relatively new. Copyright 2019. I bought it back at the end of 2023 and read it over a extended vacation. It's only about 5 years old, but you know, sometimes new books show up in the used bookstores. Fate of the Fallen is a very curious book. The main character is a forester, and foresters in this setting are this line of people that are effectively pledged to and raised to tend to the forests. They're forest tenders, really. They maintain the forest's health, planting to replace fallen trees and maintaining the grounds for other people. And they all have a very weird culture. They have a shared culture among them all, despite them being separated geographically by large distances. But the foresters are all kind of weird in the same way. Oslo, his name spelled A-A-S-L-O, is one of these foresters, but his buddy is effectively a chosen one kind of character. He showed up in town as an infant, was handed over to this one family to raise, to train as a warrior, to train as a leader, and he does all that. And then eventually a witch comes back to the village to pick him up and guide him on his journey. So it starts off in a very almost satiric way because it's hitting those points very on the nose. The main aspect of this is that despite all of this chosen one buildup, in the first few chapters, Matthias, this chosen one character, ends up being killed by assassins who are basically trying to bring about the end of the world by killing him. The forester, Oslo, follows his friend who, you know, he and Matthias, they spent their childhoods together. They helped each other train for, you know, fighting with the sword, for being leaders. Everything that Matthias learned, Oslo learned as well. Matthias dies, and Oslo picks up his decapitated head and carries it in a bag with him. Kind of similar to Henchman 21 in the Venture Bros, if you're familiar with that series. Oslo carries around his best friend's skull and kind of talks to it, and it talks back in his mind. But kind of in the vein of that kind of story, he sometimes responds to it as if it were talking aloud. And so when he responds to it, he is seen as a bit weird. Oslo heads off first to let the king of the land, which he calls home, that the chosen one is dead. Here is his sword, his head, and to make preparations for the failure case, I guess. And Matthias is the sole descendant of this powerful magical bloodline, and Oslo basically says he's going to take up that mission instead because he's already out of the forest, which is something foresters aren't usually supposed to do. And so he goes out there. The story is that he is going out there to do this job, and he ends up meeting at one point like the Marquess of a land to the far south, but he refuses the Marquess because he has his own goals. But as it turns out, as the story progresses, he needs to go to that Marques's land anyway. But now, the person in charge of that land is unfavorable towards him because the forester already refused his call to service in the early part of the story, and so they don't get along well at all. Along the way, Oslo picks up a collection of other strange people, including two thieves who he saves from a bad situation, and they basically devote themselves to his service, but are then eventually let go and then decide, we're going to give up on this new task and follow him anyway, which is just as good because the new task would have been maintaining this inn specifically for foresters, a inn that is one giant tree that has been grown in such a way as to provide accommodations for people. And the two are tasked with tending to that and to wait however many decades it takes for another forester to leave his home forest and go to the capital. And as it turns out, their decision to abandon their post is good because that one tree ends up burning, and so them surviving is good for the story. Like most stories in this genre, Oslo is, because he's groomed and trained to be a leader, in his case specifically to be a forester, but because of Matthias and them two taking a lot of lessons together, Oslo is now effectively a good leader for misfits and outcasts, and that's what he leads for the rest of the story. The ending is interesting. It builds upon a couple plot points from earlier in the story, and the most interesting plot point, which does play a factor, it does play a role in getting to the end, but not in a way that I'm going to spoil. Bloodlines, all the magic bloodlines in this setting are descended from people who took oaths, basically swore oaths with Fae, and just like in most stories in fairy tales, making bargains with Fae tends to have repercussions. And in this case, like Matthias, is descended from one of those bloodlines. And there is a very specific number of bloodlines, and due to fighting amongst them, a couple of them are no longer on this earth. But Matthias is one of those last few of one of the remaining bloodlines. And so it's a lot of kind of standard tropes baked into this one, but with a subversion that the character interacting with all of these setting details isn't one who himself is within that community. Because, like I said, he's not from one of those bloodlines. He's a forester, and foresters really aren't supposed to interact with the outside world in the first place. So the fact that he's interacting with them, and then with these bloodlines, and with saving the day, and all this, that, and the other, is very unique. Another interesting facet of this story is that basically all the mages of any power and importance have given up on the world. The end times are coming, and all of them with any power have retreated to another plane, basically. They are deciding that they can restart humanity on a new world using their magic to guide very important people. In a lot of sci-fi stories, that kind of concept is carried over, where they take effectively a Noah's Ark scenario, and it's usually referred to by some allusion to Noah's Ark, and they take experts in agriculture, experts in chemistry, physics, engineering, architecture, environmentalism. They take all these experts and bring them to a new world so that they can restart humanity, but with a lot of its mysteries already figured out. And so the knowledge isn't lost. The magic users in this setting do that as well, which means that the people that remain don't expect much of the magic user in the group, that all of these people that are doing their utmost to save the day are going to fail, because if the mages couldn't do it, then how can these people do it? So it's a interesting subversion, and then brings itself back to a more standard apocalyptic fantasy theme where the good guys are heroes because they don't give up even when everyone else has. And that's really the point of Oslo taking up his friend's head. Whereas the mage that was accompanying Matthias says, if Matthias is dead, I need to leave you. I appreciated you as a kid, Oslo. As a young adult, I appreciate you. But I don't think we're going to win this. And so she is active in the group that retreats from the world. Oslo refuses to give up even when prophecy says he's going to fail because the chosen one has died. He has a group of misfits that really aren't experts in combat or warfare or magic or anything that could save the world, and yet he refuses to give up. The one gripe I have with this is that the ending is kind of unsatisfying. It makes sense within the realm of the setting's lore, but it's just not one I'm interested in sticking out. So this is the first part of a series. The following book, Destiny of the Dead, is already out, but I'm not really interested in picking that one up. So I don't know yet if I'm going to put this back into circulation. I'm thinking I won't, but I might eventually. The only other thing that I was kind of annoyed by with this book is that the cover art shows a man throwing a war axe, but it is constantly emphasized throughout the story that the weapon that he's carrying, which everyone assumes is a weapon because it's an axe, is actually a woodcutter's axe, which has a very distinct wedge shape. You know, a woodcutter's axe isn't the sort that is good for fighting. Bearded axes, you'll never see a woodcutting axe with that beard, that prominent flange at the bottom, that you will see some war axes with. And so the cover art doesn't really show that Forrester's axe well. That's only a small gripe, though. Other than that, the book's alright. I'll probably read it again, so yeah, that's Fate of the Fallen, and thank you for tuning in to another used book rant.